Well, the holiday season is over. We survived everything, the travel, the stores, the traffic, everything that goes along with it. I don't know about you, but I'm always glad when it's over, although I do like portions of it. It is a little more relaxed time of year. People seem to be a little more laid back. Time off to enjoy every now and then with a few vacations. And people seem to disengage from everything, so it's not quite as hectic, which I think is what we all need in the society we live in today. But all of us, whether we get involved that much with the holiday season or not, we are involved with it from Thanksgiving to New Year's in one way. One item in our lives that's very much involved with all of us is family. And it affects us because it seems like that's the time of year where people have more time off and can travel and can kind of get together. My grandson usually comes to visit us a week during Christmas, but he didn't this year because my son had to travel to Switzerland for a week to work, and my grandson's very close to my son since his mother died, and he didn't want to come this year. He wanted to stay back over there with them. So we've been over to Dallas the last 3 out of 4 weekends, and it's been pretty hectic. I won't tell you where my son went to work while he was in Switzerland. Just happened to be Hershey's headquarters. I know some of you will love that. Anyway, when I was growing up, I don't know about your family life, but I had a good family life. I was very much spoiled by my grandparents on my mother's side because my mother was an only child. Her brother had died when he was 2, and so my grandparents looked to me as being their son that they lost. And he was quite famous. His name was Ronald McDonald. No money ties with it, but that was his real name. I think if I remember correctly, he died of smallpox or diphtheria or something along those lines. But my grandparents spoiled me, and I thoroughly remember it to this day as if it was yesterday. You know, when I was 6 years old, I had 2 ponies. I rode in the rodeos every year with my grandfather, and we did all sorts of things. I was driving dump trucks at age 12 and tractors. Probably couldn't get away with that now. Probably be considered child abuse. But I learned a lot, and I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I think a lot of you have. But one of the things that we are facing in our society today is a major problem with the family. How are we doing as a nation in building strong families? I put a question mark after that, and I didn't answer it because I don't know. I know we work very hard at building a strong family relationship with our kids and grandkids. I know a lot of you do as well. But there are so many stories out there that we could sit and talk about of horrible situations. I've got a couple I'll tell you about, but it's tragic. It really is. I don't know if you've had a chance. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with my sermon, but does involve families. If you haven't watched this show on TV, it's a several hours long series called Men Who Built America. It is absolutely unbelievable. It has to do with the Vanderbilts who controlled the railroads, the Carnegies who had the steel business, the Rockefellers that controlled the oil business in the late 1800s, and then J.P. Morgan, who was a banker. It's an extremely, good series that has to do with big family names who helped establish this country. But we as a nation and as a people and as mankind even throughout the world, we have solved many problems down through history. And we've done phenomenal things. We've put men in space, living up there right now in a space station. We've put men on the moon back in August of 1969. And we have programs to save frogs and birds and whales and, what is it in Alaska, the polar bears. We have an eco-green world everybody's trying to live in. You pull into some of the stores here, especially the new Fresh store, and they've got signs for little vehicles, eco-friendly vehicles. So my pickup truck doesn't cut that. But we have energy-efficient light bulbs, and you've lost, the 100-watt now and the 60-watt light bulbs. You're going to something else that's more energy-efficient. Water conservation. They have toilets now that have 2 different flush systems in them for liquids and solids. It's incredible what they do for water conservation to make things work. These projects become almost a religion for people when they get involved with them. And you have to go along with them or you're going to be in trouble. You really will, because our world is changing. But we will go to great lengths to protect every living thing on this planet except our families. Or more specifically, children. Because they're our future families. And they are the future leaders of our society. And we have a serious problem. When I come across these situations and stories and personal things to get involved with people I know, it just shatters your system, your emotions, because of what these families are going through. Where will this neglect of families lead us in the future? There's going to be a price to pay, one way or the other. And as we look at what has happened to the structure of the family, we have to come up with some kind of a solution, some way to correct it. The problem to do that is not that difficult. The correction is not that tough to get involved with and accomplish. But there's a deeper problem behind it that I think we're going to see today. Are we having a stronger family connection within this country? I think the answer has to be, America, we have a problem, a serious problem. What will our next generation of leaders be like? What will our next generation of children be like? How do we strengthen, and I think we're all concerned with this, how do we strengthen our nation? How do we strengthen our children? How do we strengthen our society? And more specifically, even because this does affect us as well, our churches. It's the children. They're the ones coming along. Why do you think we have so many churches where there are so many gray-headed people in it? I've seen more children up here today than I've seen in a long time, which was very, very encouraging. But children need to be involved with church. Children need to be involved with the aspects that we're going to talk about today. Education, and probably we look at education being first, but probably the first one ought to be, the second part of it I'm going to talk about is example. Example ought to be first, because you can't educate kids if you don't have a good example. So the example's got to be there first. And we do have, believe me, myself included, we can do a better example along the way. There was a touching story in the Tyler paper. I think it was December the 20th, about a couple, and it just really brought tears to my eyes, to think about it. But this couple here in Tyler had been married 67 years. The wife died in the morning, and the husband apparently they were in their early 80s. The husband apparently was not home or whatever. But anyway, when they finally got a hold of him shortly after lunch to tell him that his wife had died, he passed away that afternoon. And it's just really touching to hear something like that. The people that are connected that way, as the strong, they become one union, and truly it was one union. But you don't hear that very often. It doesn't happen like that. But it was just a touching situation, and it's something that has stuck with me for the last couple of weeks because of what it was. I can tell you, stories of family situations. People have great expectations when they get married and when they have kids, and no matter what their beliefs are, whether they go to church or don't go to church, everybody wants things to work. But so many times they don't work, and their dreams are shattered, and they're dumbfounded as to why. And in many cases, the few cases I know about, they don't have the foundation to build on and to make something work and to make something last and continue to get better. One of the things that we're supposed to do as parents is that each generation should get better. And by that, we teach our children as we go, we train them, we help them to see the mistakes that we have made, and hopefully they will offset that as they get older and as they mature, and they will learn from past experiences that didn't work. And each generation should build on that and should develop to the point that you don't have to go back and keep handling and dealing with the same problems. But we don't do that. And right now, nationally, with what we're going through as a nation, we seem to be going backwards. It seems to be coming apart at the seams. And with some of the things that have happened, it has been tough. It really has. And it has gotten everybody's attention. I know one man, I've known him for 31 years. He got married very young, had a son, did not raise his son because he got divorced. His mother raised his son. He had very little to do with him. He lived with the girls. He lived with the ex-wife's sister for about 12 years. They had a daughter. I never got married, but he had a daughter, and they got separated from her and got remarried. They had another child by another lady. And his life has been nothing but up and down. Now, the first son and daughter are not only half brother and sister, but they're also first cousins. And it has been an unbelievable up and down situation at times throughout his life. I know two other young men who are in their mid-20s, and they each have 5 children. They can barely afford to feed them, and the most important thing to them is whether they have a nice car or a flat-screen TV. And it's sad. I know another, probably one of the saddest cases, and I know these two people very well. The man is in his early 80s. The wife is, I think, 68. They've been living together for 32 years. He never divorced his first wife, and they have raised this lady's granddaughter from day one. Her son abandoned her. And I know this girl real well. She's about 15, watched her grow up, talked with her, been around her, for 15 years. And she has had to experience this type of a broken family for 15 years. That's what she's been having to put up with. I think the world of these two people. I know them very well. They're good friends of mine. But they've never gotten where they should be. And this girl has had some problems, and it's been tough. Where is that going to lead later on as she gets to be 20, 21, 25, and begins to have a family? I sat down, I was thinking about what is destroying our families the other night. I came up with 6 areas that I feel are destroying our families, and statistics do show that. And to be more specifically, they are shattering dreams of people. And people wonder why it's not working. Number 1 is abortion. You know how many abortions there are per year in this country? 1.2 million abortions per year. 22% of all pregnancies end in abortion. From 1973 to 2005, there have been a total in the United States of 45 million abortions. And we wonder why they're not going to be able to fund Social Security later on. I mean, there's people who would have been citizens of this country who are not there. Number 2, the divorce rate. First marriages, 41 to 50% end in divorce. That surprised me. I didn't think it was that high. Second marriage is 67%, and the third marriage is 73 to 74%. Those percentages are astounding. You wouldn't think it would be that high, but it is. Number 3, shacking up or living together, as I call it. It seems to be like every time I run into somebody these days, they're living together. They've never gotten married, especially young people. In the USA today, the first marriages from 1990 to 1994, the statistics of it were 54% of the people lived together before they got married. I thought that was a little high, but that's what the statistics showed. Number 4, the alternative lifestyle. And we know all about that. It's affecting our society. In the USA today, 51% of the people approve of it. What are we down to now? 3 states that have approved same-sex marriage?
Yeah.
Is that many? Yeah. Maryland, I know, just came on the 1st of January. But it is growing. Point number 5, and I just came across this the other day because I heard it on the radio. The number 1 risk for marriages today in the United States, and this surprised me, the number 1 risk is pornography. This is according to marriage counselors. And I guess that would stand to reason with the internet and the access to knowledge, as we call it. But that's the greatest risk to marriages today. And this last point I came across, I wrote this down about a year ago because I came across it somewhere, and I happened to come back across it again. Children living apart from their fathers. From 1960, it was 10% of children. You know what it is today, 2010? 27%, which is talking about broken families. So how are we doing as a nation? If you want to look at a little research and look at what the past has brought us, how are we doing? Well, as a nation, we are probably more concerned, and I think this is a fact, we're more concerned with the pedigree of our animals, the type of car we drive, the clothes we wear, or the home that we live in, or the specific area of town that you live in our homes, than we are concerned about with our children or with our family structure. A lot of the people that I run into and have over the past several years, broken families and having the kids one weekend and not having the kids the next weekend because the other parents got them. It's become a part of life and a way of life, and people live with it. They put up with it, and it's no problem. It's no big deal. It's just something everybody, and a lot of them, are involved with, and it's shocking to me. I came from a fairly stable family, even though my dad was a character. but they never divorced, and he ruled the roost with an iron fist. And I was trained a certain way and brought up a certain way. And at the time, I never felt it was child abuse. I had the leather belt used on me several times, and I deserved it. But I don't even think you can discipline kids today without getting in trouble. I know you can't do it at school, but I think even at home, if you try to do it, your neighbor can, file a suit. Or I heard about a year ago, I believe, that they were even doing something where children could file a lawsuit against their parents if there was a problem. I don't know how that ever turned out, but how are we doing as a nation? I mean, what are we coming to? The family structure is so important. What do we need to understand first about the family before we even try to correct the situation? Turn over, if you would, to Jeremiah, the 9th chapter. Here's where the big problem is, and people don't want to talk about it because it involves God. They just don't want to discuss God. Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 23. Thus says the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, let not the mighty man glory in his might, let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glories glory in this. Now those first three items, wisdom, might, and riches, are something that we glory in as people today. We go all out to try to have all these things. But God says, let him glory in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord. That's where the problem is we don't understand who God is and what God expects and what he wants. And you have to understand God. You have to understand who he is and what he has done so that you can correct the problem that is there. He says, I am the Lord which exercises loving kindness, and something people don't want to hear, the next one, judgment. Yeah, God is going to judge. And righteousness in the earth, for in these things I delight. Judgment is an evaluation of man's way. And God is going to judge and evaluate man's way. He's doing that right now, but there will come a time where he will intervene and do what he needs to. But we need to understand what God expects and what he wants. And if you don't have people and children and families discussing, acting out in their lives what you find in the Bible, how can you develop a strong family and make it last and make it work? You have to have these to do this. God says this is what he delights in. And as we're going to see, there is a right and there is a wrong. When God created the earth, when God created man and woman, what did he tell them to do? He told them to be fruitful, to multiply, and to replenish the earth. They had to have offspring. They had to populate the earth. It was God that created what? The family. The first family had their problems as well, as you well know. We're not going to go back and look at that. But this was part of God's creation. This was part of him creating mankind, man and woman, the relationship that exists, the family that was supposed to be established, and how it was all supposed to work. And when you look at the solution to correct the problem is easy, but the problem is deep because there is an element that is trying to destroy the creation that God has created, as you and I well know. And in some cases, there are forces behind the scenes that are trying to do that and destroy God's creation even to this day, just like took place back in the Garden of Eden. You know what our problem is now, what we are experiencing? We are still experiencing, and we wonder why this all happens, but it happened back in the Garden of Eden. You read about it in Genesis chapter 2. They partook of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we are experiencing that today because we are finally coming to see what real, true evil is. And it's only going to get worse until Christ returns. It would do people well to go back and read the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. They don't want to do that, though, because it has to do with the Bible, it's Old Testament, it's past history. It doesn't apply to us today. But read what happened to nations, including the nation of Israel, when their morality and their spiritual depravity went to pieces and collapsed and disappeared, and what happened to them as a nation. You know, it was years ago I was reading, I think it was Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. One of the reasons the Roman Empire collapsed was because the destruction of the family. So where are we headed as a nation? What are we doing about it? Are we just going to pass more laws? I'll get to that in a minute. If you would, turn back to the book of Romans, chapter 1. I won't keep you very long today. I'll edit as I go for time, but I do want to cover some highlights here. This is where we begin to understand what is actually happening and the depth of the problem of what is happening to God's creation. And it started back in the book of Genesis and it's still going on today. It's not something that's going to go away. It's going to be with us. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. God has revealed his intent and what he's doing and what is taking place, and man has rejected it. We don't have excuses. We can't make excuses and say, we didn't know, you didn't tell us. No, it's not going to hold water anymore. God has said that we are without excuse, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Oh, we've done plenty of that. We profess that we've got all the answers to everything. What we see here is a side religion being developed because as they threw God out, they had to incorporate something else into their lives. Four-footed beasts, animals, mythology, other gods. And we're still doing that. We think we're more civilized and more educated today, but we're just changing some of the obstacles and some of the gods that we've put in place of us. The problem is it's the suppression of truth. That is what has hurt. The real problem, more specifically, is in verse 28, which is identified as pure human behavior. Something that, even though times have changed and millenniums have passed, and things have been altered down through history, mankind is still the same. Same desires, same weaknesses, same problems, and the same desire to get rid of God in their life. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, verse 28, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. A mind that is void of judgment. That's what's happened. And yet we think because we have all this knowledge that it's available to us at the touch of a mouse, that we can get everything we need to know. There's a lot of good knowledge out there, but people want to reject the good knowledge. They want to reject the best knowledge, which you have in your laps, because it seems so out of date. We are fighting against not only physical things with our own desires and weaknesses and frustrations and imperfections, but we're also fighting against, as Paul talked about in Ephesians, powers that are higher than flesh and blood. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and against principalities in high places. And this is going on behind the scenes, and this is something I'm convinced that is a part of the problem that we face today. You go back and look at one of the best families, one of the first families, if you will, not Adam and Eve, but Abraham in Genesis 18. And I just want to read a couple scriptures here about him because he was on the right track. He wasn't a perfect individual. He was human. But you know the story of Abraham, his faith, his obedience, his love for God. And as the angels were going to look at Sodom and Gomorrah and see what to be done, they thought about, should they really tell Abraham? But in Genesis 18, verse 17, it says, the Lord said, shall I hide this thing from Abraham that I'm going to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great nation and a mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. If you go back to the early part of Genesis where it talks about Abraham, the word nation is family. All the families of the earth would be blessed because of what Abraham did. It says, for I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. This was a tremendous man, a wonderful individual in what he did in his faith and in his righteousness. And you can turn to Genesis 26:5, where it talks about Abraham was what he was because Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. This is what made him who he was. This is how he developed his family through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as you go down through history. God's chosen, selected people. They became and were what they were because of Abraham and because of clinging to the law that God had given them. And people don't like to hear that term. They don't like to hear the word obedience or to follow or to live by. We kind of have the attitude like you find at the end of the book of Judges. The book of Judges was a book that talked about the morality, the deprived condition of the people of Israel. Horrible problems throughout the whole book. And you come to the last verse in the book of Judges, and it says, there was no king in the nation of Israel, and everyone did that which was right in his own eyes. That's kind of where we are today. We want to have this attitude that we can do whatever we want because everybody has the freedom and the right to express themselves and to do whatever feels good. I think we came across that in the 60s, didn't we? For those of you that are my age, if it feels good, do it. That's kind of, I wasn't allowed to do that because my dad's hand was bigger than mine. And, he put a stop to that. But it was interesting when I was younger. But now that I look back, I think, boy, wasn't that something I'm glad I didn't get involved with. Too many lives and shattered families occur because of what happened back then. But God promised the families of the earth would be blessed through Abraham. And had it not been for Abraham, we wouldn't be where we are today. And we wouldn't have what we have today. I'm convinced of that. I think this prophecy about what would happen in the future is something that we have because of Abraham. And the world is still in the situation that it's in, better than it could be because of the blessings from that. There are two examples of broken families in history. And I'm going to hit them very quickly because I'm not going to keep you here that long. But I do want you to at least be aware of them. And it's a sad state because it all happened because of the broken family situation and the problems that developed when God's law was failed to be passed down to these people. And it broke a nation apart 2 different times. It never recovered. It never redeveloped and did what it was supposed to do, because the actions of what happened from these 2 families destroyed the nation of Israel. Number 1, 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 1. I'm going to hit this fairly quickly. When Samuel was old, he made his 2 sons judges over Israel. Sounds like a pretty good deal, doesn't it? Families followed and became overseers. However, verse 3, his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after money, took bribes, and perverted judgment. That sounds awful familiar today, doesn't it? I read over that again and I thought, is he talking about politics today? They turned aside after money, they took bribes, and they perverted judgment. The people were upset about it. To make a long story short, what happened was, in verse 7, the Lord said to Samuel, hearken to the voice of the people. They didn't want God anymore. They wanted a king, a physical king that they could look to who would go out before them like all the other nations. He said, hearken to the voice of the people and all that they say unto you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. And you think of the problems we have today. The rest of this chapter, if you read it, will tell you exactly what we can expect because of what happened back here when this family fell apart and Samuel's sons didn't follow in his footsteps. The nation rejected God. They set up a king, and these next few verses, all it says is, he will do this, he will take that, he will take this. They do that today with taxes. We have no one to blame but, ourselves. We would have made the same decision, but that's what happened back there. See, what we're still doing is we need to still go back to the Garden of Eden when they took of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because that's what we are experiencing still today. Oh yeah, we have this knowledge, but we also have evil, and it's not going to go away. And if you read the prophets enough, I'm not an expert by any means, but I read them a lot, and when I read them, what I see is it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And people want to know, what happened in Connecticut. It's tragic. But I remember what Jesus said in Matthew 24 in describing the events before the end time. He said, these are only the beginning of sorrows. And I think that's what we're going to see before it's all said and done. Sounds kind of pessimistic, but we know how the outcome is going to be, and it's going to be a whole lot better. 1 Kings chapter 11. Just a couple comments on that. A man by the name of Solomon. And what you learn from his life is that it's best to have one wife. He had some problems, and I'm sorry, not 1 Samuel 11, 1 Kings 11. I'm going too fast here. 1 Kings 11 is a story of Solomon, all the wives that he had, and everything that he was involved with. In verse 6 it says, Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and went not fully after the Lord as did David his father. So what was passed on to Solomon worked for a time because God was very pleased with Solomon, but then it got out of hand. He began to incorporate too many other things in his life. Verse 7, Solomon built temples in high places to Chemosh, to Molech. You know what that was? It was child sacrifice. That's what that was. Because his wives came from pagan societies. It was a part of their life. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, verse 9, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which he had appeared unto him twice. So you think all we need today would be miracles and for God to appear to us? No, it wouldn't do any good. God's already tried that. He did it in Egypt to the Israelites. He did it to Solomon. We'd probably have a lot of press coverage, but it wouldn't change people's lives. maybe just a few. He commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded. People don't like to know what the Lord has commanded. It's all been done away. It's all been thrown out because it's no longer necessary. And this is where we are. This is why we have problems with the family falling apart. Anyway, he says that for as much, in verse 11, as this is done to you, you have not kept my commandments and covenants and statutes, I will rend the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. What happened here was the division of the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah. Never recovered. The nation of Judah that you see today is, just a small part of what was once there. The nation of Israel, as you read through prophecy, was sifted through the nations and became lost, become wherever. Who knows wherever they are? It was not a small nation, it was a big one. But they never recovered. Two examples of broken families that destroyed a nation. And if we're not careful, if we don't try to get control of our own families here today and try to rebuild our family structure as a nation, where will it lead us? Where we are right now, we find in Isaiah chapter 5. To put it in modern terms, good and evil is all mixed up, and we don't know which is what. Woe to them that call evil good and good evil, Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. That's how I look at our society today. People don't have any sense of what is right and wrong. And why is that? Well, they don't want to get too involved and cozy with the Bible because they just might find out that there's something they're supposed to be doing. And people don't want to have to do certain things. They want to have that style, as I mentioned in the last of the book of Judges. Everybody wants to do that which is right in his own eyes. We are experiencing the taking of the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's what it goes back to. Our society is a disaster right now, and it is changing these last few years, probably the last 10 years. The culture of this nation is being changed dramatically, and a lot of it has to do with the family structure, the lack of it. Just because we are, as a society, this even goes back probably more like 15 years, but we are supposed to be politically correct, culturally correct. But nobody ever asks about being biblically correct. Because again, that's too burdensome. Just because a society votes to change the rules, and this goes back 40 years, just because we change things doesn't make it right. And the freedoms that we see we're losing because of everything that's being done over a period of years and years and years, it's just a matter of time until, and I'm surprised this hasn't happened already, where you can't take your child to church because they're a person and they have a right not to go if they don't want to, but because they're young, we get away with it. I'm surprised there hasn't been something along those lines where they say, you can't force a child to go to church. I think it will come to that. We have freedom. Enjoy it, because I think times are changing. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the minister from Germany during World War II that was executed right at the end, said the test of morality of a society is what it does for its children. What are we doing for our children? Like I said, the education example, the two keys. Example is probably first, because you've got to have a good example to educate a child. You can't educate a child and tell them not to drink too much when the child looks at you as a parent and says, you're telling me not to drink too much and you're drunk. Or you tell me not to smoke and you're smoking. Or you tell me not to do this and yet you're guilty of it as well. You've got to have those two together. You can't just pass laws to make things work. I mean, we're going to pass all sorts of laws here pretty quick. I mean, you know, you've got the gun issue, you've got 16-ounce sodas. I mean, where's it going to go? You know what I was thinking about the other night when I was going through this? We are in the same situation, a very, very similar situation as to what it was like when Jesus came the first time. What was it he did when he came the first time? What was his main complaint with the Pharisees? Too many laws. Matthew 23. Too many laws that compounded the problem of understanding what God wanted. He said, your laws have made the commandments of God of none effect. When he comes back the second time, what is he going to have to do? He's going to have to get rid of all the laws that we've enacted over the, 200 and some years as a nation, even with our Constitution, and get us back to the 10 Commandments, which are so basic, so simple, that if we could just get children and families to live by the 10 Commandments, do you realize how much different this world would be? That's too simple, I guess. I'm not smart enough to, figure out another way, but that's what scholars would tell you. We have too many laws right now, and when Jesus returns, as I was growing up as a teenager, I always thought, it's going to be wonderful when Jesus returns because everybody's going to be so happy with the state the world is in. But when you read Revelation chapter 11, and you find that when he returns, the nations are angry and go to battle with him, they're going to try to remove him and get rid of him just like the Pharisees did because he messed with their way. He didn't put up with it. He's not going to put up with it. He's going to set the record straight. And Jesus, when he said, my burden is easy, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. You know why he said that? We don't need all these laws. Those 10 that he gave way back in the very beginning is all that's really needed. If you could get your children and pass down to them to live by the 10 Commandments, it would be a totally different world. It really and truly would. You don't even have to put in the Sabbath if you want to. If people wanted to just take one of the commandments and not observe them, it would still make this world entirely different. But people don't want to have to answer to anybody. That is a cultural problem, and that is a spiritual problem because of the forces that are behind the scenes and the temptations that you and I face as well. We are fighting higher powers that are bent on destroying God's creation. The 2 points that I'm going to cover them very quickly because of the time factor. One, as I mentioned, was education. Proverbs 22:6, which I memorized years ago. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. When I was growing up, there was a family in the Indianapolis church. I don't know if Charles remembers this or not. I'll tell him the name afterwards. They were about 4 years younger than Charles. They were my age as well. And before the parents would paddle these children, they would make them recite Proverbs 22:6 before they would paddle them. And I witnessed that several times, and I thought, boy, I'm glad my dad just paddles me and gets it over with because I'd probably get paddled twice for not remembering the scripture. But that's what's needed. You've got to train up a child in a certain way. You can't let children, and I've seen parents do this. Oh, he's young, he's learning, he needs to experience the world. And so they just let him run wild. You can't do that. You've got to control them. Proverbs, we could go through Proverbs for quite a while, but I'm not going to do that for time. It's important to educate children. That's why, go back to the book of Deuteronomy very quickly, if you will. Deuteronomy 6, where it's given to how to bring a family along and how to bring children along. Israel was instructed by God himself in verse 4 of chapter 6 in Deuteronomy. You shall love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart. That's pretty rough language. God commanded it. He said, I command you this day that they shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, verse 7, shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them for a sign upon your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the posts of your house and upon your gates. And he says, when you become rich and increased with goods, don't forget me. And don't forget what you're doing. That's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple solution to correct the problems that we're facing today. He says in chapter 7 and verse 9, he said, know therefore that the Lord your God is a God, the faithful God, which keeps covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. You know, a generation was anywhere from 20 to 40 years. The people that walked in the desert, for 40 years, that was a generation. 1,000 generations, does that sound like something that's supposed to end, when Christ comes, his first time? 1,000 generations, multiply 1,000 times 40, what do you come up with? 40,000. That's a long time. It's for a reason here, because God says this is supposed to be something permanent and lasting and to continue. 1,000 generations. Point number 2 is example. One scripture, Ephesians chapter 5. Can we do better with the family atmosphere? The best scripture I'm not going to turn to is probably in 1 Peter, where it says Jesus left us an example that we should follow in his footsteps. We should be an imitator. We should be a disciple who imitates the master and do exactly what he did. That's the best way to approach it. But Ephesians, Paul was giving people here a little idea of what family life should be like and how it should work. And I think one of the best scriptures, for example, in discussing the relationship that you and I have with families is what he said that we should do as fathers in relationship to Christ. He says in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, husbands, love your wives even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. It's as simple as that. If fathers could take care of the family like Jesus took care of the church, that would change the family structure dramatically. It really would. That's an atmosphere of love, compassion, forgiveness, discipline, correction, which Hebrews says we need as people. We need that. He said that he might present the church to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. Wouldn't you like to be able to present your family and your children at that point, as when they become 20 or 21, when they begin to form their own life and be married? See, we're supposed to correct the mistakes as each generation comes along, and to get better and to overcome them. And what we are doing is we keep going back and dealing with the same problems and greater problems as each generation comes along. Life should get better. The problems should be fewer. As you as a Christian, as you grow and as you develop, shouldn't you have to not battle the same problems that you did 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago when you were first baptized? Shouldn't you have progressed a little bit and gotten a little bit better? That's the way life should be. That's the way family should be. With each passing and succeeding generation, the family should become stronger and should be more stable. And we're not there. Jesus said, a house divided cannot stand. And that is the same for a family and for a nation. And we are seeing a lot of that in all cases. Study the nation of Israel. Get as much as you can about their history, because what they went through and what they did and what they paid for is something that we are facing today. Some of these prophecies have a ring to them that's very similar to what we find today. That one in Isaiah 5, verse 20, calling that evil which is good and calling good evil. We are there today, and people don't want to acknowledge that. Solution is simple. It's there in your lap. But will we take the time to put it into practice? Each generation should learn from the past. Parents have a gigantic responsibility to build strong families for our children. The foundation that must be established has to be God's Word. and parents' example. We've got to learn the lesson from history before it's too late. Will our children, the next family, the future leaders, will they change our nation for the better or for the worse? The next generation of leaders is living among us. Will the family survive?